you know that feeling when your entire world crumbles in a single day? When everything you've worked for, everyone you've trusted, every dream you've built just disappears? That was me 3 months ago. My name is Alex, and I thought my story was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But sometimes when you're at your absolute lowest point, when you have nothing left to lose, that's exactly when the universe decides to give you the tools for the most incredible comeback you could never imagine. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was sitting in my corner office on the 47th floor of downtown Manhattan, looking out at the city I thought I'd conquered. I was the youngest partner at Morrison, Clark & Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. At 32, I had everything I thought I wanted: a 7-figure salary, a penthouse apartment, respect from my peers, and what I believed was a solid marriage to Sarah, my college sweetheart. But you know what they say about things that seem too good to be true. They usually are. That Tuesday started like any other. I arrived at the office at 6:30, grabbed my usual black coffee from the lobby cafe, and settled in to review the quarterly reports. The markets were looking good, our clients were happy, and I had just closed a major deal that would secure my position as senior partner by the end of the year. Life was perfect, or so I thought. The first crack in my perfect world came at 10:15. My assistant Jennifer knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before. She looked nervous, almost frightened. "Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are some men here to see you. They say they're from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission." Those 3 letters sent a chill down my spine, but I maintained my composure. "Send them in," I said, straightening my tie. "It's probably just routine." But as soon as those 2 agents walked into my office, I knew this wasn't routine. Agent Martinez, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, and Agent Johnson, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, sat across from my desk and opened a thick file folder. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Martinez began, "we're here regarding some irregularities in your recent transactions, specifically trades made on behalf of the Whitmore Foundation and several other high-profile clients." My blood ran cold. The Whitmore Foundation was my biggest client, a charitable organization that I'd been managing for 3 years. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Agent Johnson slid several documents across my desk. "These show clear evidence of insider trading, market manipulation, and embezzlement of client funds. We're talking about over $50 million, Mr. Thompson." I stared at the documents in disbelief. The signatures were mine. The trades were executed from my computer, and the money had indeed been moved. But I had never authorized any of these transactions. "This is impossible," I stammered. "I've never seen these trades before in my life." "Mr. Thompson," Agent Martinez said, her voice cold and professional, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They were arresting me. In my own office, in front of my colleagues, my career was ending in handcuffs. The next few hours were a blur of fingerprints, mugshots, and phone calls to lawyers I couldn't afford. The firm immediately suspended me pending investigation, which we all knew was just a polite way of saying I was fired. The story hit the financial news within hours. Rising star at Morrison Clark arrested for massive fraud scheme. But the worst was yet to come. I was released on bail that evening, thanks to my parents mortgaging their retirement home. I drove to my penthouse apartment, exhausted and bewildered, hoping to find some comfort in Sarah's arms. I needed her support more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. I opened the door to find the apartment empty, not just empty of people, but empty of everything. Sarah's clothes were gone, her jewelry, her books, even the photos of us together. The only thing she left behind was a note on the kitchen counter. "Alex, I can't be associated with this scandal. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Don't try to contact me." 24 hours. That's all it took for my entire life to disappear. My career, my reputation, my wife, my home, everything I had worked for since college was gone. The penthouse was in both our names, but Sarah had somehow managed to freeze all our accounts. I couldn't afford the mortgage, couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford anything. Within a week, I was living in a studio apartment in Queens that smelled like cigarettes and regret, working at a customer service call center for $12 an hour. The mighty had fallen, and fallen hard. But here's where the story gets interesting, because I was about to discover that my fall from grace wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated, planned, and executed by people I had trusted with my life. It was 3 months into my new reality when I received the call that changed everything. I was sitting in my cramped apartment on a Friday evening, eating a microwave dinner and watching the news coverage of yet another financial scandal that wasn't mine, when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, expecting another debt collector or telemarketer. "Alex Thompson?" The voice was electronically distorted, clearly using some kind of voice modulation software. "Who is this?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "Someone who knows the truth about what happened to you," the voice said. "Someone who has evidence that can clear your name and destroy the people who actually committed those crimes." My heart started pounding. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" "Meet me tomorrow at Riverside Park near the Shakespeare statue at noon. Come alone, tell no one, and bring a USB drive. What I'm about to give you will change everything." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for several minutes, my mind racing. Was this a trap? A setup by whoever had framed me in the first place? Or could it really be someone with information that could salvage my life? I barely slept that night. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, to assume it was some kind of cruel joke or elaborate scheme to make my situation worse. But another part of me, the part that had always believed in fighting for the truth, knew I had to take the risk. Saturday morning, I took the subway to Manhattan and walked to Riverside Park. The Shakespeare statue stood in a quiet corner of the park, surrounded by benches and tall trees that provided plenty of cover. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat on a bench, pretending to read a book while scanning the area for anyone who might be watching me. At exactly noon, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Look under the bench you're sitting on. Tape the envelope to the bottom. Don't look around, don't try to find me. Take it home and call the number inside." My hands were shaking as I reached under the bench and felt around until my fingers found a thick manila envelope secured with tape. I quickly pulled it free and slipped it into my jacket pocket, then casually walked out of the park, fighting every instinct to look over my shoulder. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and closed all the blinds before opening the envelope. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, and a small piece of paper with a phone number written on it. But it was the contents of those documents that nearly made me fall off my chair. Bank records showing payments from Morrison Clark to offshore accounts. Email printouts discussing the timing of trades to maximize profits, while pinning the blame on a fall guy. And most shocking of all, photographs of my soon-to-be ex-wife Sarah meeting with Richard Morrison, the senior partner at my former firm, at what appeared to be romantic dinners and hotel entrances. The pieces began falling into place like a horrifying puzzle. Sarah hadn't just left me because of the scandal. She had been working with Morrison to create the scandal. The affair had been going on for months, possibly years, and I had been marked as their patsy from the beginning. I called the number immediately. "I assume you've reviewed the materials," the distorted voice said without preamble. "Sarah," I whispered. "She was working with Morrison the whole time, not just working with him," the voice replied. "She's been planning to take over the firm once Morrison retires. Your arrest and disgrace were just the first phase of their plan. They needed someone to take the fall for their embezzlement schemes, and you were the perfect candidate. Young, successful, trusting, and completely unaware of what was happening around you. But why are you helping me?" I asked. "Who are you?" There was a long pause. "Let's just say that Morrison and Sarah's plan affects more people than just you. They've been stealing from client accounts for years, including accounts belonging to my family. I've been gathering evidence for months, waiting for the right moment to act. What do you want me to do with this?" "Nothing yet. This is just the beginning. What I've shown you proves your innocence, but it's not enough to bring them down completely. They've been very careful, very clever, but they have one weakness." "What's that?" "Greed. They can't resist the opportunity to steal more, especially now that they think they're untouchable. Sarah is about to inherit a substantial trust fund from her grandmother's estate, $25 million that Morrison thinks he can manipulate her into investing with the firm." My mind was reeling. Sarah's grandmother had always been wealthy, but I had no idea she was that wealthy. "How do you know about the inheritance?" "Because I've been tracking every move they make. The will is being read next week, and Sarah will have access to the funds within 30 days. Morrison has already prepared fake investment opportunities to steal most of it, just like he did with your other clients' money. So what's the plan? We're going to give them exactly what they want, and then we're going to destroy them with their own greed. Are you in? I thought about everything I had lost, everything they had taken from me, my career, my reputation, my faith in people I had loved and trusted. But more than that, I thought about all the other innocent people who might be destroyed by their schemes if we didn't stop them. I'm in, I said. What do I need to do? Over the next 2 weeks, my anonymous ally and I worked together to set the perfect trap. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. We would create an irresistible investment opportunity that would tempt Morrison and Sarah into stealing not just Sarah's inheritance, but millions more from other clients. My role was to play the part of the defeated ex-husband who was desperate to win Sarah back. I reached out to her, begging for a chance to meet and discuss our divorce settlement. I told her I had accepted a plea deal and that I wanted to make things right between us before I went to prison. Sarah, confident in her victory and probably curious about whether I had any hidden assets she could claim, agreed to meet me at an upscale restaurant in Midtown. I wore my best suit, the one I used to wear to board meetings, and arrived early to calm my nerves. When Sarah walked in, I was struck by how different she looked. She was dressed more expensively than I'd ever seen her, wearing jewelry I didn't recognize and carrying a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly rent. She looked happy, successful, and completely unremorseful about destroying my life. "Alex," she said, sliding into the booth across from me with a practiced smile. "You look well, considering everything." "Thank you for coming," I said, playing the part of the broken man. "I know things ended badly between us, and I don't blame you for leaving. I just wanted to apologize and make sure you're okay." She softened slightly, probably thinking this would be easier than she expected. "I appreciate that. This hasn't been easy for me either, you know. The media attention, the questions from friends and family." I nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. And I heard about your grandmother. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said, and for a moment I saw a flash of genuine sadness. Her grandmother had been a sweet woman who had always treated me like family. It made what Sarah was doing even more despicable. "I know this might sound strange," I continued, "but I want you to know that if you ever need financial advice or help managing any investments, I still have some contacts who could help you. Good people who weren't involved in what happened to me." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of contacts?" I pulled out a business card my anonymous ally had created. "A wealth management consultant named David Chen. He specializes in high net worth inheritance planning. He's completely independent, works with clients all over the world. Very discreet." Sarah took the card and studied it. "Why would you want to help me with this?" "Because despite everything that's happened, I still care about you," I said, meaning only the part about caring. "And because I know your grandmother would want you to be smart with the money she left you." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was probably thinking about how she could use this contact to help her and Morrison's schemes. Or maybe she was genuinely considering getting advice independent of Morrison's influence. "I'll think about it," she said, slipping the card into her purse. We talked for another hour, mostly about mundane things like the divorce proceedings and what I planned to do after my legal troubles were resolved. She seemed almost relaxed by the end, probably convinced that I was truly defeated and posed no threat to her new life. After she left, I called my anonymous ally. She took the bait. Perfect. Now we wait. David Chen, of course, was my mysterious partner. Over the next week, Sarah contacted him and arranged a meeting to discuss investment strategies for her inheritance. During that meeting, David presented her with what appeared to be an exclusive opportunity, a pre-IPO investment in a revolutionary technology company that was about to go public. The investment required a minimum of $10 million, but David explained that early investors could expect returns of 5 to 10 times their initial investment within 6 months. He showed her carefully crafted documents, fake financial reports, and even arranged for her to accidentally overhear a phone call where another wealthy client was begging to increase their investment in the same opportunity. Sarah was hooked, but $10 million was more than even her inheritance would provide. That's where Morrison came in, just as we had predicted. When Sarah told him about the opportunity, he immediately saw it as the perfect vehicle for their latest theft. Over the next 2 weeks, Morrison began moving money from client accounts, creating fake investment portfolios, and forged documents to cover the transfers. He was stealing from pension funds, charitable organizations, and individual retirement accounts. By the time they were ready to make the investment, they had gathered nearly $30 million in stolen funds. But here's the beautiful part of our plan. David Chen and his investment opportunity didn't exist. The company was fake, the documents were fraudulent, and every penny they invested went directly into an account controlled by the FBI. Because while Morrison and Sarah thought they were stealing money to invest in a fraudulent scheme, they were actually funding their own destruction. My anonymous ally had been working with federal investigators for months, and our entire operation was being monitored and recorded by law enforcement. The day Morrison and Sarah transferred the $30 million to David Chen's account, FBI agents simultaneously raided Morrison's office, Sarah's apartment, and several offshore accounts where they had been hiding their previous thefts. They found everything: the forged documents, the embezzled funds, the evidence of insider trading, and most importantly, recordings of Morrison and Sarah discussing how they had framed me for their crimes. I was at work in the call center when I got the call from Agent Martinez. "Mr. Thompson, I think you'll want to see the news today." I rushed home and turned on the television to see Morrison and Sarah being led away in handcuffs. The news anchor was explaining how a months-long FBI investigation had uncovered one of the largest financial fraud schemes in recent history, involving the theft of over $60 million from client accounts. But the story got even better. As part of their investigation, the FBI had uncovered evidence that I had been framed for crimes I didn't commit. All charges against me were dropped, and the government announced that they would be seeking restitution for the damage to my reputation and career. My phone rang again. This time the voice on the other end wasn't electronically distorted. "Hello, Alex. I think it's time we met properly." "I'd like that very much," I said. "I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything. Justice is its own reward." We arranged to meet at the same park where this whole journey had begun. When I arrived at the Shakespeare statue, I was surprised to see a woman in her 50s sitting on the bench, wearing a simple business suit and reading the financial section of the newspaper. "Alex," she said, standing up with a warm smile. "You're not what I expected," I said, shaking her hand. "I'm Margaret Whitmore," she said. "My late husband founded the Whitmore Foundation." Everything clicked into place. "Morrison was stealing from your foundation, among others," she nodded. "My husband died 2 years ago, and I've been managing the foundation ever since. When I noticed irregularities in our accounts, I hired a private investigator to look into Morrison's activities. That's when we discovered the scope of his operation and realized you had been framed. Why didn't you go to the authorities immediately? Because Morrison was too careful, too well connected. We needed him to make a mistake, to get overconfident and steal enough money that the FBI would have to take notice. Your situation provided the perfect opportunity. What happens now? Now you get your life back," she said. "The FBI has recommended that all charges against you be dropped with prejudice. Morrison, Clark, and Associates is being dissolved, and several firms have already reached out about offering you senior positions. Your ex-wife and Morrison are looking at federal prison sentences of 15 to 20 years. And Sarah's inheritance will be returned to her grandmother's estate and distributed to charity, as specified in a codicil to the will that Sarah apparently never bothered to read carefully." We walked through the park for an hour, talking about the investigation, the elaborate planning that had gone into exposing Morrison and Sarah, and what my future might look like. Margaret offered me a position managing the rebuilt Whitmore Foundation, with a salary that exceeded what I had been making at Morrison Clark. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're one of the few honest people in finance," she said, "and because you've been tested in ways that most people never are. You kept your integrity even when you had every reason to become bitter and cynical." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at the Whitmore Foundation, watching the morning news coverage of Morrison and Sarah's sentencing hearing. Morrison received 18 years in federal prison. Sarah got 15 years, with no possibility of parole for 8 years. The reporter mentioned that both defendants had attempted to plea bargain by claiming they had been manipulated by Alex Thompson, the man they had previously framed for their crimes. The judge had dismissed their claims as a transparent attempt to blame their victim and imposed the maximum sentences allowed under federal guidelines. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Justice served. Congratulations on your new beginning." I never heard from that number again, but I didn't need to. Margaret had taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting the people who wronged you. Sometimes it's about making sure they face the consequences of their own actions while you rebuild something better than what they tried to destroy. The Whitmore Foundation now manages over $200 million in charitable investments, and we've implemented safeguards that make it virtually impossible for anyone to embezzle funds without detection. I've been featured in financial magazines as an example of ethical leadership in investment management, and I've been invited to speak at conferences about fraud prevention and detection. But perhaps the sweetest part of this whole story is what happened to Morrison, Clark and Associates. Without Morrison and with their reputation destroyed, the firm collapsed within months. The remaining partners lost everything. Their clients fled to competitors, and the building that once housed my corner office is now a discount furniture store. As for my personal life, I'm doing better than I ever imagined possible. I met someone wonderful, a fellow fraud investigator named Lisa who works for the SEC. She understands what I went through because she's dedicated her career to catching people like Morrison and Sarah. We're taking things slow, building a relationship based on trust and honesty rather than the illusion of perfection that had defined my marriage to Sarah. I've learned that losing everything can actually be a gift if you're willing to see it that way. When your life falls apart, you discover what really matters and what was just window dressing. You find out who your real friends are and what you're truly capable of surviving. Morrison and Sarah thought they had destroyed me, but they actually set me free. Free from a career that was built on appearances rather than substance, free from a marriage that was a lie, and free from the illusion that success means having things that can be taken away from you. The anonymous call that changed my life came from someone who understood that justice isn't always delivered by the courts or the police. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who refuse to stand by and watch evil triumph. Margaret Whitmore could have simply moved her foundation's money to another firm and walked away from the problem. Instead, she chose to fight, not just for her own foundation, but for everyone Morrison and Sarah had victimized. I think about that choice every day now. When I see corruption or fraud in the financial world, I don't just report it through official channels. I remember what Margaret taught me about the power of strategic thinking, careful planning, and patient execution. Sometimes the most effective way to stop a criminal is to let them think they're winning right up until the moment they lose everything. The call center where I worked during my lowest point recently reached out to offer me a position on their board of directors. They wanted someone with my experience to help them develop financial literacy programs for their employees. I accepted, not because I needed another job, but because I remembered what it felt like to be desperate and grateful for any opportunity to rebuild. Every Friday I volunteer at a legal aid clinic, helping people who have been falsely accused of financial crimes. I've seen too many cases where innocent people are railroaded by prosecutors who care more about conviction rates than justice, or where real criminals manipulate the system to blame their victims. Last month, I helped exonerate a single mother who had been framed for embezzlement by her boss at a non-profit organization. The case was almost identical to what happened to me. Forged documents, manipulated computer records, and a fall guy who was too trusting to see the trap being set. The difference was that she didn't have an anonymous ally with the resources to fight back. But she had me. And now, she has her life back, just like I do. The most important lesson I've learned from this whole experience is that revenge isn't about making your enemies suffer. It's about making sure that justice is served and that they can't hurt anyone else. Morrison and Sarah are in prison not because I wanted them to suffer, but because they needed to be stopped. The money they stole has been returned to their victims. The firm that enabled their crimes has been dissolved, and the financial industry is a little bit safer because their scheme was exposed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered that anonymous call. If I had been too scared or too broken to take the risk, Morrison and Sarah would still be stealing from innocent people. Margaret Whitmore would still be fighting her battle alone. And I would still be living in that cramped apartment, convinced that my life was over. But I did answer the call, and when I thought I had lost everything, I discovered that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of getting everything that really matters. The anonymous caller was right about one thing. What they gave me changed everything. Not just the evidence or the plan for justice, but the reminder that even in our darkest moments, We're not as alone as we think we are. There are people in this world who care about truth and justice, people who are willing to take risks to help strangers, and people who understand that sometimes the best way to heal from betrayal is to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. When I thought I had lost everything, I received an anonymous call that gave me something far more valuable than everything I had lost: the chance to become the person I was always meant to be. If you enjoyed this revenge story, smash that like button. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in this situation. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss when I upload new content.